As documented in a number of episodes on the channel over the last few years, during the early part of my Navy career, the tactical center of gravity for East Coast carriers was the Mediterranean. Deployments in the 6th Fleet area of responsibility were punctuated by cat-and-mouse operations against Russian cruisers and destroyers and the occasional submarine, and in one case in the mid-90s, their carrier Kuznetsov, which was on its first of several ill-fated cruises. This photo from that same deployment shows Lieutenant Ted Templeton and me in Diamondback 110, an F-14B, trapping aboard the USS America CV-66 with a Russian Submarine-class destroyer in company off the port side. Russian presence in the region waned following the end of the Cold War, but plussed up again in 2013 as they created a permanent task force assigned to the Mediterranean. The numbers of vessels varied from time to time, but since 2022, the task force has consisted of 2 diesel-powered improved Kilo-class submarines, 2 Yasen-class nuclear-powered submarines, 2 Slava-class cruisers, 2 Udaloy-class destroyers, 3 frigates, 2 Stergushchi-class corvettes, and several associated support ships. Now, starting in 1971, Russian naval presence in the Med included the use of the port at Tartus, Syria, and in 2011 they concentrated ships in that port as they entered the Syrian civil war on the side of the Assad regime. In early December of 2024, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS for short, ousted Assad, forcing the Russian auxiliary ship Yelnya, 3 Russian guided missile frigates, an improved Kilo-class attack submarine, and 2 support ships to leave Tartus and loiter off the coast of Syria. Under Assad, Russia had secured a 49-year renewal of its longtime lease on the port of Tartus, home of the only Russian naval base in the Mediterranean. When HTS forced Assad to flee the country in December, that long-term port agreement was thrown into doubt, since the Russian Air Force had bombarded HTS and its allies throughout the Civil War, including during the most recent rebel advance on Damascus. But even as the warships left Tartus, the Russian government put on a brave face, saying that they were negotiating with the new Syrian government to maintain the status quo. But as recently reported by the Maritime Executive, earlier this week, HTS canceled Russia's 49-year operating lease at the port of Tartus. As reported by local Syrian news agency Levant 24, quote, according to the director of Tartus Customs, the agreement signed with the Russian company to invest in Tartus port has been canceled, and all of its revenues are now for the benefit of the Syrian state, end quote. Russian military cargo vessels Sparta and Sparta II joined the task force loitering off the Syrian coast in early January. As Russian ground forces accumulated a stockpile of valuable equipment, Ukraine's military intelligence claimed earlier this month that Syria's new rulers were not allowing Russian ships to enter Tartus to remove that giant accumulation of gear, which most likely includes several top-end S-400 surface-to-air missile systems. But after the news broke of the cancellation of Russia's long-term port lease, the Russians decided to make their move, even at the risk of provoking a military response from HTS. Sparta II entered the inner harbor and berthed next to the equipment stockpile. As of now, satellite imagery hasn't shown the vessel loading the staged vehicles for shipment, but it's almost certain that it will. The next destination, whether in Russia or in another part of the Mediterranean, remains to be seen. Other possibilities for military ports include Benghazi, Tobruk, or Alberti, locations in eastern Libya controlled by Russian-backed leader Khalifa Haftar. The viability of those options in the near term is none of them are comparable alternatives to Tartus, and there are currently no signs of new construction. And Haftar is 81 years old, so any deal might run into political turmoil after his regime ends. The other news is now it doesn't look like Russia has any submarines left in the Med. As confirmed by the Portuguese Navy, under the cover of darkness on January 2nd, the improved Kilo-class submarine B-61 transited through the Strait of Gibraltar on the surface, not submerged. This movement breaks a decade-long chain of Russian Navy Kilo-class submarine presence in the Mediterranean and is a direct result of the loss of Tartus, the installation where the Kilos were based. Without it, sustained conventional submarine ops are untenable, as they have to remain at sea between occasional port calls in pro-Russian countries, which are few. The current status of their nuclear-powered submarines in the Med is unknown. The Russian Navy's struggles in the Mediterranean are symptomatic of wider issues faced by the Russian military in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine, which has diverted significant sustainment and manpower resources since February of 2022. Those issues will come into sharper focus in the weeks ahead as the Trump 47 administration works to make good on the campaign promise to end that war, and we'll be reporting on it, so if you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.